Hi, I'm Sunita.
Hi, I'm David Collingwood. I'm Director of Funerals with the Co-op Funeral Care.
Can you tell me a little bit about this research?
We surveyed 2,000 of our funeral directors, so this has come right from our sort of frontline people across the country, actually getting a real cross-section of people's choices for actual funeral music, and it's been fantastic to see the results.
Are there any surprises from the charts that you've seen? Are there any surprises that jump out to you from what's in there?
One surprise that jumped out for me on the list was the Monty Python Always Look on the Bright Side of Life. I mean, I totally get it because I think the Brits are balmy and they are funny and wacky and but I was surprised that it would be officially in the top 10 of funeral songs.
I think the biggest surprise for me was to realise that in the top 10 now that there are actually there's no religious music, there are no hymns in there, and we had regularly the Lord's my shepherd and Abide with me, hymns that as a funeral director I'd sort of hear and probably could say the words, sing the words to without even looking at the lyrics now because of heard them so often. They've dropped out now, and I think that's probably an indication of, number one, people's choice now. People feel as though they can actually choose something, and also the relevance to a lot of people now of hymns with funerals.
What advice would you give to somebody who is trying to pick their song? How would you pick the right song for you? And have you picked a song already?
My advice would be not to think that you have to go for a sort of cookie cutter funeral experience, and to not try to recreate what I know it sounds awful, but like the typical funeral, but to really think about the person the funeral's for and their personality, their tastes in music and songs that will help people to remember them the way they'd want to be remembered. And yes, I have chosen a few songs, but one of them is Always by Stevie Wonder, because the song explains love, a kind of unconditional, never-ending love, and different circumstances, the only circumstances where that love wouldn't exist. And, until heaven becomes earth and earth becomes heaven, until the moon becomes the sun and the sun becomes the moon, and just situations that will never happen. So therefore the love will never end.
I think the advice I would give to people, and perhaps do give to people, is to make sure that actually the choice of music is relevant to the life of the person and actually means something, so it's significant. And don't worry, because I know for myself, my own sort of thoughts around this, they do change as you hear different things and you experience different things in your life, before kids, after kids. It does change, and that's perfectly normal. It's perfectly all right to do that. And I think understanding that is, don't overthink it. Just think at the time and say, actually, what would be appropriate? What do we think? And talk to people about that. And actually, those pieces will come up that are actually really relevant and really important. And I think for me, probably, I'm Catholic, so when I die, my wife isn't. So I'm hoping that I'll have a Catholic funeral and probably cremation after that. But I would like to weave in popular music into that for me. So currently probably anything by Richard Hawley for me, but also two standing outs as I was thinking about this today would be Sunshine on Leith by the Proclaimers and Magnificent by Elbow.
How do you start that conversation? How do you go about telling people what you'd like?
Well, it's a funny thing. For some reason, about 5 years ago, I was randomly thinking, gosh, what would I do? I don't know if it, you know what? In fact, it was that I lost a very close friend's mother and then started to think about what I would do and how I would cope if I lost my mother and got myself so upset. And I was thinking, gosh, and how would I plan a funeral? What would I, like, I'll be in such a state. And I ended up calling my mother in floods of tears and saying, I don't know what I'm going to do when you die, and how will I plan the funeral, and I won't know what to say, and how am I going to... And she was like, excuse, like, what's going on? Why are we having this conversation? But I sort of got myself quite worked up. But it was good because in the end, we had such a lovely chat, and she was just like, look, you first of all, you don't need to worry about any of this now because I'm not going anywhere. But, when it does happen, this is the kind of funeral I'd like. And she started to tell me. And I was like, and what songs will I play? And she said, well, you could sing. And I was like, oh, I won't be able to sing. I'll be far too upset. I won't even be able to speak, let alone sing. And I said, what would be really nice is if you were there, because my mother's got an amazing voice. I would love it if you could be there and you could have sung. And she laughed and she said, well, why can't I? And I went, well, and she said, well, why can't I? These day and age, why couldn't you? And so we devised this thing whereby I could film her singing her favorite gospel song and message to all her loved ones at her funeral. And it was kind of gave me goosebumps, because you think, well, as much as this is kind of balmy and a bit crazy, a bit strange, my mother is balmy and crazy and a bit strange. And she can talk the hind legs off a donkey like me. So why shouldn't she have the last word at her funeral? And we ended up in hysterics, laughing, imagining all of our friends and everything there going, and now, ladies and gentlemen, I hand you over to Michael Brown. And there she is, the Miss Thing, singing her song.
I think for me, this is a really difficult subject, talking about your funeral, but I find that people have no problem at all in talking about funerals generally, because certainly when people find out who I am and what I do for a living, there are loads of questions that come, and people ask you lots of different things about, is it true that, and does this happen? And for me, it's brilliant to be able to talk to people, actually answer those questions. I think the real difficulty is when you actually start to come to talk about the funeral of yourself or your loved one, because it's then so very real and so very literal. And a lot of people prefer just to push it to one side and say, look, I'm not prepared to do that, I'm not strong enough to do that, or it doesn't feel right, or it might even be wishing it on, and those things are there, and I quite understand that. And I think those little opportunities to be able to just to start to have the conversation, you don't have to go from the every minor detail of the funeral through to the scattering of the ashes afterwards and the service sheets, but actually if you just were able to indicate your thoughts on what music you would like, or thinking about and discussing with your loved one about what music they would like, that's actually a real start in terms of having that conversation. And if that leads you to even talking about burial or cremation, for example, that's another major step, an indication for your family to know actually what it is that you would want. And even if you don't want to talk about what you do want, or you don't know what you do want, indicating what you know you don't want is probably a really important thing as well, just to give your family and your loved ones an idea around your wishes.
You've undertaken many, many funerals, I think over 33 years. What are some of the oddest, in inverted commas, requests that you've seen?
There's no such thing as an odd request, in my view. And after my years of being, I've really been all my life in funerals from when I was quite young, just fascinated by the subject, but actually knowing that it's something that I knew I would be. And my aspiration was to be a funeral director, and I'm now director of funerals with the biggest funeral company in the UK, and I know I'm very, very lucky. But every family that I look after, no matter what their request is, it's unique to them. And we have a really simple rule, which is said, look, if it's legal and decent, then we'll do it and we'll organise it. And what is perhaps surprising and unusual for some families is perfectly normal for others. And for me, being able to encourage people not to worry about the neighbours and not to worry about what Auntie Gladys might think in terms of your choices, but to know that you've chosen something that is just so fitting for your loved one. And then for us as professionals to be able to help you deliver that and experience that as well. Surely that that helps. It just in terms of marking that physical goodbye and actually then starting that road to learning to cope with bereavement and learning to cope with your loss. And that's something we've probably not talked about, but having the funeral and having a bespoke funeral and having it the way that you want it to be, it has to be a stepping stone, shall we say, along in terms of the grief process and learning to cope with grief. Because I say to people, I'm not a trained counsellor, but I know that, grieving and bereavement, you never get over it. You learn to live with that loss. You learn to put it in a place and it comes out at appropriate times, but it can go back in that place and you can get on with your life and you never get over it. And grief is unique to every individual.
I'm looking at you now and I'm thinking, gosh, how important you are to all of this, because it's like, if you're having a child, how you want that special doctor that's going to deliver your baby. Your role is so important that you're actually, taking people through this process, that's so life-changing, and as significant or even more significant in some ways, because adding to a family is one thing, but actually someone leaving the family is much harder. That I don't know, like, can people like book you? Do people just contact you? And so, I'm sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, I want you to do my funeral, because anything I want, I know will be allowed. You know, so long as it's legal and decent.
And
Yeah.
I think for me, it was wonderful to hear for you to say that. I think for me as a professional, it's knowing that, and I represent not just the co-op, but I represent the funeral profession. And for me, knowing that, you know, right the way across the country, there are funeral professionals who hopefully, you know, come from the same place that I do in terms of vocation and professionalism. That's really important for us, because there are no, there's no regulation in my profession. There are no licenses. Anyone can be a funeral
Right, so
director.
this is not it's not a religious position or anything. It's literally just empathy and compassion.
You need to be the right person, I think, to do this. And I think for me, knowing a good funeral director is somebody who can listen, who will go through options, who will never choose for a family, will never push them into a bit, but actually talk about the choices and try and guide somebody down that path where bereavement, it's called cognitive grief. Your normal sort of thinking and thought process is quite narrow and quite blinkered. So in that small field, you've got to have options put in front of you that you can process and
Yes.
agree with, and
Yeah.
that there's a skill to be able to do that, to make sure that actually afterwards the family can say, do you know what, that went just the way that we wanted it to be, and it was perfect in every way. And actually that helps, and that gives me a sense of pride knowing that myself or members of my team have been able to deliver that.
It's lovely.
Within the chart, there are a couple of songs that jump out to us. So, for instance, and what I'd really like to ask you is how would you feel if you were attending a funeral of a loved one? How would these type of songs make you feel? So, for instance, another one, Bites the Dust by Queen, you know, Burn Baby Burn, that these types of songs that perhaps, you know, would make you sit up and think, oh, how do you think that would make you feel if you were at a funeral where that was played?
Another one, Bites the Dust, would definitely lighten the mood, wouldn't it? And obviously be representing someone who had a great sense of humour and who didn't want everyone sort of feeling suicidal and so upset. The Burn Baby Burn, I think I may be a bit taken aback by. But again, I think anything that can kind of shock you out of that kind of deep mourning, it would be a good thing.
Now, So Macho has not made the chart this year.
David, can we talk about that? What
I'm
happened?
so sorry. I think we need a recount.
So do I.
But if you found out that someone had picked So Macho as their funeral song, how would that make you feel?
I'd feel so happy. I'd probably want to attend the funeral, because I think that means that somebody's obviously been teased, you know, all their life about either not being so macho or for being a bit of a medallion man or something. But I know that there's a lot of humour in that, and that's the, you know, I mean, obviously I'm American by birth, but I've been very shaped by the British sense of humour, and it's gotten me through a lot of difficult things in my life as well. So yeah, it would really, I would love that. I would love that people were able to make people chuckle at their funeral.
So where can we go for more information on this?
To find out more information on the funeral survey, if you go to coop.co.uk/funeral music, there's the main chart on there and lots of other different variant charts as well. It's quite interesting reading.
And you know what? If you have thought about your songs, or if you've thought that you'd like at your funeral, or songs that you think should be included on the list, please go onto Twitter, write the name of the song and follow it with the hashtag funeral music. The other thing, just talk about it. Talk to your family, talk to your friends, talk to your children, talk to your parents. We never know what's going to happen. David was telling me also about the fact that you can get caskets wrapped, the way you can get cars wrapped with, you know, with the things that are appropriate for children and things like that. Now, this is not wishing anything on anyone, but, you know, if you were suddenly hit by grief, you wouldn't be able probably to process your thoughts and know where to begin. So I think it was very sweet that David's, was it your daughter or granddaughter?
Kitty, yeah, Kitty.
Said, oh, you know, I'd like a coffin like that when I die, because she saw a coffin for a little girl that she thought was beautiful. And where it actually can be quite scary that you're thinking, well, I don't want my child thinking about the kind of coffin she'd like. If something happened to your child, what a blessing for you to know that you're able to lay her to rest in a coffin that she would love to have had. So yeah, don't be afraid to talk about it, and enjoy it. Think about who you are and who you love and what you'd like to say.